Welcome, dear friend, to a night of calm and comfort. Tonight we drift together to a peaceful winter windmill where time slows and worries fade, settle, and breathe deeply. And let this cozy story guide you into restful sleep on the far edge of a quiet countryside where roads slowly forgot their own names. And the land stretched out in gentle, patient curves. There stood an old windmill that had learned how to breathe with time itself, its wooden arms turning not with urgency, but with understanding, moving in slow, thoughtful circles. Beneath a winter sky brushed pale silver by the moon, and tonight the air around it felt especially soft, as if the night had decided to walk more carefully than usual, snow resting along the roof and clinging to the beams in delicate layers, each flake settling without sound, without demand, simply arriving and staying the way calm often does when you finally allow it. And the windmill welcomed the snow as it always had not, resisting, not rushing, just holding still while the world gently layered itself around it. Inside the thick wooden walls, warmth lived quietly, not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily, like a heartbeat you only notice once you slow down enough to feel it, the faint glow of firelight breathing amber light into the corners of the room, stretching shadows that swayed lazily across the floor as if even darkness had grown tired and decided to lie down for a while. The air inside carried the soft scent of old wood, tea leaves, and winter smoke, a scent that felt familiar, even if you had never been here before, because it reminded the body of safety, of shelter, of being somewhere you did not need to explain yourself. The windmill had stood through countless seasons, through summers when the fields hummed with life, and winters when the land slept deeply under white stillness, and each year it learned something new about patience, about waiting, about the gentle rhythm that exists beneath all things. If you listen closely enough, its beams creaked now and then, not sharply, not suddenly, but with the slow, reassuring sound of something stretching after a long rest, like an old friend shifting in a chair. And those sounds did not interrupt the silence. They belonged to it, weaving into the quiet like low notes in a lullaby meant for the earth itself. Outside, the wind brushed past the sails, not pushing them, not demanding motion, simply guiding them along, as if reminding them that movement could be soft too, that effort was not always required. And with each slow turn, the windmill seemed to mark time in its own way, not by seconds or minutes, but by breaths, by heartbeats, by the gentle passing of one peaceful moment into the next, far away beyond the fields. Distant village lights glimmered faintly like sleepy stars that had settled too close to the ground, but their celebrations felt distant here, softened by snow and space, unable to disturb the calm that wrapped the windmill like a thick, invisible blanket. And as the night deepened, time itself seemed to loosen its grip, no longer pulling forward, no longer pushing behind, simply hovering in a quiet pause that felt safe enough to rest within. The windmill had seen many New Years arrive with noise and hurry, with expectations stacked too high and resolutions spoken too quickly. But tonight was different. Tonight felt slower, kinder, as though the year itself had decided to enter gently, without knocking, without lights or alarms. And the walls of the windmill seemed to lean inward slightly, holding the warmth closer, protecting the stillness like something precious. The floor beneath felt solid and steady, reminding anyone within that they were supported, that they could let their weight sink down, that there was no need to stay alert or prepared. The fire whispered softly, its crackle low and rhythmic, like a voice telling a story meant not to be followed closely, but to be drifted through. A story that required no effort, no attention, only presence. And as the wind continued its quiet conversation with the sails, the entire windmill felt alive in the most peaceful Way not alive with urgency or movement, but alive with awareness, with the kind of existence that knows it has nowhere else to be, nowhere else to go. And in that knowing, rest became natural, inevitable. Like night following day, the snow continued to fall, sealing the world into a cocoon of silence, softening edges, smoothing sharp thoughts. And if you listen closely, you might have felt your own breathing begin to match the slow turning of the sails in and out, steady and calm, as though the windmill was gently teaching you how to slow down simply by being itself. And in this place at this moment, there was nothing missing, nothing required, nothing expected. Only the quiet certainty that rest was allowed here, that sleep was not something to chase, but something that would arrive naturally when the body felt safe enough to receive it. And so the windmill continued to turn slowly, patiently, keeping time, not for the world outside, but for the gentle unfolding of rest within, as the night wrapped everything in its calm and invited all things, including you, to finally let go. And as that invitation to let go settled gently into the air, the quiet inside the windmill deepened just enough for a presence to be felt moving within it, not suddenly, not sharply, but with the same careful ease as everything else in this place, because Ellen, the keeper of the quiet hours, had learned long ago how to move in harmony with stillness rather than through it, her footsteps barely touching the wooden floor, as if she were mindful not to wake the calm itself. Her life shaped by this windmill and its slow wisdom, her days guided not by clocks or calendars, but by light, shadow, and the subtle shifts of the seasons. And tonight she moved with particular tenderness, as though the night were something fragile she wished to protect, her hands steady and warm as she adjusted a log in the fire, watching the flames respond softly, never flaring, never demanding attention, only glowing brighter for a moment before settling again into their quiet rhythm. The firelight traced familiar lines across her face, lines formed not by worry, but by years of gentle watching, of listening more than speaking, of understanding that silence was not empty, but full of meaning. Ellen had come to the windmill long ago, seeking refuge from a world that moved too quickly, and over time the windmill had taught her how to slow not just her body, but her thoughts, her expectations, her sense of urgency, until even her memories felt less heavy, more like distant echoes that no longer needed answers. She paused near the window, looking out at the snow-covered fields, and though the village lay far beyond, she could almost sense its distant energy, its preparations, its excitement, like a faint hum carried on the wind. Yet here inside these walls, none of that mattered, and Ellen smiled softly at that thought, not in judgment, but in quiet appreciation for having chosen a different rhythm. She reached for a candle resting on the sill, lighting it slowly, deliberately allowing the flame to rise at its own pace. And as it steadied, she placed it beside the window, where moonlight and firelight met, blending cool silver and warm gold into something deeply soothing. The candle was not meant to brighten the room, but to remind it of warmth, of continuity, of presence. Ellen believed that light did not need to be strong to be meaningful, it only needed to be steady. She wrapped her shawl more closely around her shoulders, the fabric worn soft by years of use, carrying the quiet memory of countless nights like this one night, where nothing extraordinary happened, and yet everything felt complete. She moved to the small wooden table, its surface smooth from time and touch, and sat down, her teacup steam rising slowly, curling into the air like a sigh of relief. The scent of herbs filled the space, gently calming the senses before they even had time to react. And as she lifted the cup, her movements were unhurried, mindful, Each small action treated as something worthy of care, because Ellen knew that the way you do small things is often the way you experience life itself. She took a slow sip, letting the warmth spread through her, feeling it reach places she hadn't realized were still holding tension, and with each breath, she felt herself sink deeper into the moment, the windmill responding in kind its beams, settling its sounds, softening as if it recognized her presence as part of its own, the keeper, and the place no longer separate, but gently intertwined outside. The wind brushed past again, nudging the sails, just enough to keep them moving, and Ellen listened to that sound with a sense of quiet gratitude, because it reminded her that even in stillness, life continued gently, reliably, without effort. She believed that the windmill kept time, not just for the land, but for her as well, reminding her when to wake, when to rest, when to let go. And tonight it was clearly telling her that rest was near, that the year was ending, not with a demand to reflect or resolve, but with an invitation to soften. She thought briefly of the year passing behind her, not reviewing it, not weighing it, simply acknowledging that it had happened, that she had lived it fully in her own quiet way, and that was enough. She placed the cup back on the table and sat in her chair, the wood fitting her like it always had, supportive, familiar, her body recognizing it as a place of ease, her breath slowing, naturally deepening without instruction. And as she rested there, candlelight flickering gently, fire humming low, snow continuing its patient fall, Ellen allowed herself to simply be, not preparing for midnight, not waiting for a moment to arrive, because she understood that moments arrive best when you are already at rest. And in that understanding, the keeper of the quiet hours became very still, holding the calm so carefully that it spread beyond her filling the room, settling into the walls, drifting outward into the night, ready to carry the story forward into deeper peace. And as that calm spread outward from Ellen's stillness, the night seemed to respond in kind, deepening its quiet and softening the air even further, until the snowfall outside grew thicker, yet somehow gentler, each flake drifting down as if it had all the time in the world, landing without sound, without urgency, layering the earth in a hush that felt almost sacred, the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, but protective, like a hand resting lightly over the heart. And the windmill stood wrapped in this slow descent of white, its shape growing softer at the edges as snow blurred its outlines, transforming it from a structure into a presence, something felt, rather than clearly seen. The sails continued their patient turning, slower, now responding to the heavier air, their movement steady and unforced. And with every rotation, they released a faint, rhythmic whisper, a sound so gentle it felt less like noise and more like reassurance, as though the windmill itself were humming a lullaby meant not just for those inside, but for the fields, the trees, the distant village, and even time itself. Ellen listened without effort, her awareness floating easily between the crackle of the fire, the soft sigh of the wind, and the nearly imperceptible hush of snow meeting snow. And as she listened, her thoughts loosened their hold, no longer forming clear sentences or memories, but dissolving into impressions, warmth, shadow, light, breath. The kind of awareness that exists just before sleep, when the mind stops reaching outward and begins to sink inward. Instead, the fire's glow dimmed slightly as a log settled, casting slower moving shadows that stretched and melted along the walls, and those shadows felt comforting, rather than strange familiar companions that had visited countless nights before. Outside, the world continued to disappear under the snowfall paths, erased edges, softened distinctions, gently removed, until everything belonged to the same quiet, the same calm, and it became harder to tell where one thing ended and another began. The windmill The snow, the night, the keeper, all part of one slow breathing moment. Ellen's shoulders dropped a little more as she noticed how warm she felt, how supported the chair was beneath her, how steady her breath had become without her asking it to change. Each inhale slow and full, each exhale long and releasing, as though the body itself remembered how to rest when given the right conditions. The past year drifted briefly through her awareness, not as a sequence of events, but as a feeling, a sense of movement and change that had now reached a natural pause. And instead of holding onto it or pushing it away, she allowed it to pass. Like the clouds had earlier, knowing there was nothing she needed to take with her into this moment of rest. The snow continued falling, patient and persistent, creating a world where sound had no place and effort was unnecessary. And in that quiet, the concept of midnight began to lose its importance, time stretching into something wide and gentle rather than narrow and measured. The windmill responded by slowing just a little more, its turning now almost meditative, marking not minutes, but breaths, not hours, but heartbeats. And if one were to listen closely, it might have felt as though the entire place was breathing together in and out in perfect unison. The fire, the wind, the snow, the keeper, all settling into a shared rhythm that required nothing asked, nothing promised, nothing beyond this simple, profound peace. And as the snowfall wrapped the windmill more completely, sealing it into a cocoon of white and warmth, the world outside faded to a distant idea, leaving only this moment, this stillness, this gentle lullaby made not of sound but of presence, inviting everything within its reach to rest, to soften, to drift just a little closer to sleep. And within that cocoon of falling snow and shared breathing, the moment that others called midnight arrived so quietly it barely announced itself at all, slipping into the windmill like a soft thought rather than a turning point. No bells rang, no voices rose, no sudden brightness cut through the dark. Instead, the night simply deepened, as if acknowledging the change with a slow, respectful nod. And for a brief, while even the wind seemed to pause, the sails resting between turns, the snowfall thinning just enough to let the silence settle fully into place, a silence so complete it felt tangible, like a blanket gently laid across the world. Ellen sensed the shift, not through sound or sight, but through feeling, a subtle easing in her chest, a quiet clarity that came not with excitement, but with relief, as though something long carried had finally been set down. She placed her hand lightly over her heart, feeling its steady rhythm, grateful, not for any particular moment or achievement, but for continuity, for having moved through time in her own gentle way. And in that stillness, she whispered a wish so soft it barely formed words. Not a wish for change or striving, but for kindness, for slowness, for nights that allowed rest without guilt, and mornings that arrived without hurry. And as that wish left her breath, it seemed to be absorbed by the walls, by the beams, by the snow itself, becoming part of the quiet fabric of the night. The fire responded with a low settling sound, embers glowing warmly, not bright enough to demand attention, only enough to reassure. And the candle by the window burned steadily, its flame neither flickering nor fading, a small, unwavering point of light that felt symbolic without trying to be outside the world. Remained hushed, the distant village celebrations muted by space, and snow reduced to nothing more than a faint memory of sound. And in their absence, the windmill felt even more separate from the passage of time, as though it existed in a pocket of stillness, where the new year did not arrive with expectation, but with permission to rest. The idea of beginnings softened here, no longer sharp or demanding, simply present, waiting patiently. Ellen allowed her hand to fall back to her lap, her body sinking further into the chair muscles, loosening one by one, as if responding to an unspoken signal that it was safe now that vigilance was no longer required. Her breath grew deeper, slower, each exhale carrying away the last remnants of alertness. The windmill's beams creaked faintly as they adjusted to the cold, not a sound of strain, but of settling like a house sighing into sleep, and in that moment midnight passed completely, leaving behind no trace of pressure or promise, only a sense of continuation, as though the line between years had blurred into a gentle gradient rather than a sharp divide. The snow resumed its steady fall. The sails turned again unhurried, and the windmill returned to its slow rhythm, carrying the night forward without interruption, without urgency. And as the world moved on beyond its walls inside, there was only this calm, this warmth, this deepening quiet that invited everything it touched to let go just a little more, to trust. That rest was not something to earn, but something already given. And as that sense of being already given permission to rest settled fully into the space, the windmill itself seemed to soften, as if responding to the deep quiet. By turning inward, its presence growing more gentle, more inwardly focused, the slow movement of the sails becoming almost symbolic rather than mechanical, tracing wide, patient circles that felt less like motion and more like thought, or perhaps like dreaming. The kind of dreaming that happens before sleep fully arrives, when the mind drifts without forming images too clearly, and Ellen, wrapped in warmth and stillness, felt that same drifting begin within her, her awareness no longer anchored to the room or the passing of time, but floating comfortably somewhere between wakefulness and rest. The fire dimmed further, glowing softly like a memory of warmth rather than a source of light, its embers pulsing faintly in time with the windmills turning. And the candle's flame grew smaller, steadier, as though it too was settling into a quieter role. Outside, the snowfall continued its patient work, building layers upon layers, insulating the world until even the idea of cold felt distant. And within this cocoon, dreams began to form without effort, not vivid or demanding, but gentle and spacious, like scenes viewed through frosted glass. Ellen felt herself moving through these dream-like impressions, a sense of walking along sunlit paths that asked nothing of her, of hearing laughter carried on warm air, without needing to know its source, of standing beneath open skies where time did not press forward, but simply expanded. These were not memories or plans, but feelings of ease, of belonging, of continuity, and the windmill seemed to share in them, its walls holding these impressions like a vessel, its beams humming softly, as though remembering every quiet night it had ever sheltered. The line between the keeper and the place blurred further now, until it felt impossible to tell where Ellen ended and the windmill began, both resting, both dreaming, both existing in a state of gentle awareness that required no effort to maintain. Her breathing slowed even more deep and regular, her body heavy in the chair, yet supported every point of contact, feeling secure, as if the windmill itself were holding her in place, promising that nothing would shift suddenly, nothing would disturb this peace. The outside world faded completely, now no longer even a distant presence, replaced by a sense of timelessness that felt safe rather than disorienting. And in that timeless space, the windmill's dreams unfolded slowly, filled with quiet mornings, soft light, and the reassuring certainty that rest would always be possible here. That even when the sails turned faster again, even when seasons changed, this deep calm would remain at the core, accessible whenever the world grew too loud. And as these shared dreams deepened, awareness loosened its final threads, inviting sleep to take its place naturally, without effort, without command, simply arriving as the next gentle step in the night's unfolding calm, and as sleep drew nearer. That sense of timeless drifting carried with it a quiet closing, as though something behind had gently folded itself away the year that had just passed, easing into rest without ceremony, without review, like a book placed back on the shelf, after being read slowly, and with Carrot's pages no longer calling for attention, its weight no longer needing to be held. And within the Windmill, this closing felt natural, almost necessary, Ellen's body responding by sinking a little deeper, her breath steady, and unbroken, her muscles releasing the last subtle tensions they had been carrying, without her noticing the fire now little more than a warm glow holding space rather than light, and the candle reduced to a small unwavering flame that felt more like presence than illumination. Outside, the snow had nearly completed its work, the world wrapped securely in white edges. Erased tracks softened everything, belonging equally to the quiet, and in this stillness, the past year lay down gently, not pushed away, not judged, simply allowed to rest its long days, and heavy moments dissolving into the calm like breath into cold air, leaving no sharp outlines behind, only a sense of having moved, of having lived, and now of having arrived at a place where nothing more was required. Ellen did not think of specific memories or moments, because they no longer needed individual attention. Instead, she felt them collectively as a soft warmth that lingered briefly before fading like embers settling into ash, and that fading did not feel like loss, but like completion. The Windmill mirrored this transition, its slow turning steady and unremarkable, marking the passage not with emphasis, but with acceptance, as though it had witnessed countless such endings, and knew that each one flowed naturally into the next, beginning without effort. And for the body resting here, there was a clear signal now, an understanding deeper than thought. That vigilance could finally release, that the gentle watchfulness of waking life was no longer necessary. Breathing grew deeper, slower. Still, the space between breaths widening comfortably, thoughts thinning, until they became little more than sensations of warmth and weight, and in that narrowing of awareness, the idea of tomorrow softened to no longer looming or demanding, simply present somewhere ahead. Patient and distant content to wait the year ahead did not need to be imagined or planned for, because the night was devoted entirely to rest. And as that understanding settled fully, sleep moved closer, no longer hovering at the edges, but entering quietly like snow, continuing to fall long after it has already covered the ground. And within the Windmill, within the keeper, within the stillness itself, the old year slept peacefully behind, leaving the present moment clear open and ready for deep, unbroken rest. And with the old year now resting quietly behind, the night settled into its deepest calm, a stillness so complete it felt as though the world itself had paused to listen. The Windmill standing steady beneath the stars, no longer turning with effort, but with instinct, its sails moving just enough to remind the dark that all was well. Ellen's awareness drifting fully inward now, her breath slow, and even her body heavy in the most comforting way, as if gravity itself had grown kinder. The fire reduced to a soft glow that warmed without shining, the candle nearly spent, yet still present a final point of gentle light that seemed to say there was no need to hurry, that nothing important would be missed. By resting a little longer outside, the snow lay smooth and untouched, holding the land in a quiet embrace, protecting it from sound and sharpness. And within that embrace, the Windmill felt like a cradle, holding sleep carefully, allowing it to deepen naturally. No thoughts rising now, no images forming clearly, only sensations of warmth, safety, and being held in place, time losing its edges completely, becoming something wide and forgiving, something that did not push forward, but simply existed and somewhere far beyond the fields and hills. Morning waited patiently, knowing it would arrive when it was ready, knowing there was no need to rush this night to its end, and so the windmill rested, the keeper slept. The snow continued its silent watch, and everything that had been moving finally allowed itself to be still, wrapped in the quiet certainty that rest was enough, that sleep was safe, and that for now nothing else was required. Good night, sleep. Deeply the windmill will keep watch until you wake.
you.